Hello, everyone. We are here today, September 2025. We have the honor to have with us Christeen Skinner. Most of you know Christeen, who is a brilliant astrologer from England. She is the NCGR delegate for the UK area, and we are very proud that Christeen is part of the NCGR. She will tell you what is the purpose of the NCGR and what she's going to tell us about this webinar. She's going to take us for a mysterious tour about how we can expect from the planet from now until a few years, maybe 2032, something like that. It's a lot of material she's going to cover. So she wants that we keep our questions at the end of the conference. If she has time, she's going to answer them, but we have to let her go to all the material that she has. Welcome, Christeen. Thank you to be with us.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, in my typical Moon Sagittarius way, when you very kindly asked me to do this, and you said, what do you want to talk about? And I thought, oh, well, world events, that'll do, right? And of course, I didn't even think that this talk was going to happen between these two amazing eclipses. And of course, now, the news, there's something to talk about every minute. There's some politician has fallen on their sword or, unfortunately in the States been shot. So we're living in really quite extraordinary times. So I've changed the start of this talk, I don't know how many times. And it has, I'm afraid, become something of a mystery tour, as much to me as it might be to you. But let me start by saying this, and I really want you to focus on this picture. As I see it, we are moving about on the Earth, which is going through a bit of sort of cosmic soup. In the time that I'm talking, the Earth will have traveled thousands of miles, kilometers or whatever. And space is a very dangerous place. If you didn't know it already, we have been going past a black hole, which is around 19 degrees of Capricorn. And I still think we're affected by that. It's quite a dangerous place, in that that black hole is associated with vast energy and really mass destruction. And it feels like that. And I feel as though the Earth, never mind how badly we're behaving as human beings on it, we're going through something that is extraordinary. But we are moving through at speed. And by the time I've finished this talk, I do really want to leave you with hope, because although the news is so dire, it won't last forever, because nothing does. And we, on our little global bit, on our little Earth, will have spun thousands of miles and hopefully into a better place by, I think, 2032. But I'm going to start off with the sun. I really wish that when we did our charts, immediately when it tells you where Jupiter and everything else is, I wish it would also tell you what the sun was doing on the day that you were born. Because whether, how busy the sun was as you arrived, I think has a great influence on the rest of your life. You're tuned into certain frequencies. And yes, absolutely, I think the position of the planets affects the sun and the sun affects the planets. Now, if you didn't know it, we're in the middle of what they call sunspot cycle 25. The cycles have been recorded for a very long time, but in the last couple of 100 years, more precisely. And we know that there's a rhythm to these. The sunspot cycle, they say, is 11.2 years. Forget that, delete that from your mind, because it can be anything from just about 9 years through to almost 14. And they can't tell when their cycle starts how long it's going to be. There's so much that we just don't know. Just as I'm saying, we're spinning in this cosmic soup and we don't really know where we're traveling, we also don't really understand what's happening on the sun. Now, just have a look at this picture here, if you wouldn't mind. It's a graph that goes back to the 1850s through to the present. And this is the sunspot activity. Now, you're going to get a copy of this if you want it, and you'll be able to blow it up and see it yourself. But you see the figures at the left, and I've put them at the right-hand side as well. There are numbers there that tell you how many sunspots were recorded in any day. And as you can see, in some of the cycles, you've got very busy solar activity. Sometimes, the number has gone over 300. Take your eye right to the right-hand side of the page. And this is going to take you to most recently. And you can see this most recent cycle, this cycle 25, has been super, super busy. And it's busier than it's been since at least the 1840s and when these cycles started to be recorded fully. So the sun is not behaving normally. And I would argue that we're not behaving normally either. And that we're living through unprecedented times that our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, nobody's been through quite like this, that we can go and look at their personal histories and relate to it. That should, of course, also be a little bit exciting. But just have a look at what happened last year. The big line here, hopefully I can point this out to you, that was August the 10th last year. And the sunspot activity that day was over 380 sunspots. Now, you might want to think back to what you were actually doing. It was August the 10th. And look at what was happening in that week between August the 10th and August the 17th, because there is a delayed reaction between what happens on the sun and how we react to it back here on Earth. But as it happens, that was one heck of a week in the United States. You might remember that that was the Democratic Convention. And of course, at that point, we were expecting that Biden was going to stand again in November. But lo and behold, he put himself out of the race. Kamala Harris stepped in. And we now know, had that not happened at that time, maybe everything else would be different. But maybe it was always destined to be. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's something unprecedented, unscripted, extraordinary that we're going through now. Now, the sunspot activity is definitely or rather, it appears to be falling. But there are some solar scientists who are wondering if this cycle is going to be a little bit longer than normal and that it might still get a little bit busier before it starts to decline again. As I said, we don't actually know. If it does decline and we go down to minima, that minima should happen about 2031 if it was on cue, but it might not be. Now, when the number of sunspots is high, stock market activity tends to be high as well. When the number's low, people are a little bit more depressed and the traders don't push the numbers up quite as high as before. So it looks as though, I mean, if things were normal, we'd have a climb up now and now they would go then into a fall, but it might not do that. If you want to look at this, look at spaceweather.com each day. You can put it as an app on your phone. It doesn't cost you anything. And you can see what the sunspot activity for each day is. And it's useful to notice. Because if you've had a very hyped up day, you may think, oh gosh, look at that. 2 days ago, the sunspot activity was very high as well. It's the delayed reaction. So we're all of us, it affects our hormones, it affects everything. Unfortunately, I'm going to take you through some charts that don't look very wholesome at the moment, but I do really want to focus by the end of this talk on the fact that there is hope. I know it looks as though we're going and looking into a black hole and it's all bleak and everything is absolutely ghastly. I know all that. And I don't want to be too Pollyanna about this, but I also know that words carry a huge amount of weight. And as an astrologer, you have some responsibility about the wordings that you use, because we know you're planting the seed in someone's mind. If you look at them and say, actually, I don't even want to give an example of this, but if you say, well, look, if you've got planet X and planet Y do this in your chart, probably that means that you get depressed. As soon as you've planted that seed, you can't take it away again. So we need to be really careful. And I won't I hope I'm going to do my very best. I really am going to do my best not to be negative about everything, but I do need to be also realistic about some of the challenges that lie ahead. First of all, though, I want to show you this triangle that is operating right now and inside each of us as much as it is in the political world outside. There's a very interesting little planetary formula, if we can call it that, that's applying just now and is going to hang around really until about 2028, depending on how much orb you want to use. So as you probably know, we have Uranus and Pluto in a trine, and they're both of them in the air signs. And everybody's got excited about this and said, oh, it's all artificial intelligence, blah, blah, blah. That's one aspect of it, yes. But Uranus is also conjoined with Sedna. And if you want to look back to see the last time that pair were together in Gemini, you aren't going to be able to do it because you'd have to go back thousands of years. Sedna moves super, super slowly. So this is another argument to say we are in something that we don't have any previous experience of. What we do have experience of is the fact that Saturn and Neptune meet up regularly. Now, presently, and it depends how much orb you want to use, the two of them are halfway between that Uranus-Sedna combination and the Pluto. And I want to put forward the idea that we don't have to look at this as though it's all doom and gloom. We can actually see it as being potentially a very creative thing that's going on. Yes, it's mental, right, in a positive sense, because we've got this accent on the air signs. And there was a time back in August when a kite formation came into play because there was another planet, in fact, it was Mars actually in August, that was opposing the Saturn-Neptune and making that into this beautiful kite. Now think back to everything you've thought of in the last few weeks. You've probably been flying kites in your mind. Now to fly a kite well, and some people do it almost like an Olympic sport. If you were a Tibetan or whatever, it is a really big thing. Kites don't just stay up there. You'd have to be skilled at flying the flight kite and making it do this beautiful choreography. Some of the ideas, though, are going to crash, but we have to try. And I think as astrologers, we've really got to think, what kind of kites could we fly now? What new ideas can we explore? I wanted to show you the chart for today, and I've now put into this the chart for today some characters that you may not be familiar with. I'm only going to do this once, and I'm taking them out after this. But if you haven't yet looked at the dwarf planets, and these are the planets that are orbiting beyond Neptune and Pluto, and remember, Pluto sometimes comes closer to us than Neptune. These are the things in the Kuiper belt. If you don't know much about them, please go to the Astrology News Service. And Sue Keats has done a wonderful short article there explaining what each one is and what it seems to represent. And her research is immaculate. It's absolutely superb. But just let me point out one of the guys here. Right? This one here that's at 1 degree of Scorpio, that's Haumea, which is presently at right angles to Pluto. Now, they're not a very nice combination if you look back in history, because unfortunately, when they have been in a hard aspect before, the world has gone through very difficult times. And it may well be that that is the greater influence presently. We can know that, but we don't necessarily have to tune into it. I would see that as being, because I tend to, when I look at a chart, I tend to kind of almost hear music with it. It seems to me that the cellos and the double basses are making a tremendous racket at the moment and are making it very hard for us to hear the top tune. But we have to try. We really must try. And I think the flutes or the piccolos or whatever actually have got quite a tale to tell. You see this lovely green triangle in here? That's a finger of God, or a yod as you know it. And look who the characters are. Yes, there's Haumea at the top, so there's my double bass making this grounding noise and growling. But down at the bottom, we've got Neptune in Aries doing a bit frilly stuff up at the top end, and Uranus in Gemini. And again, that suggests a frilly frequency, a little bit of trills. We really must try and focus in on the lighter side of this, because if we don't, the news is going to really do us mental damage. We've been talking a lot, or I've listened to lots of people talking about Pluto going into Aquarius and the way we're going to see the world differently through the artificial intelligence. And absolutely, that's true. We are going to be like this little image here. We're going to be wearing fancy glasses where we actually can create our own image and we can walk into different realities. I'm not sure we really need the glasses to do that. I think we could do that on a daily level anyway. So the first part of this talk, I really just wanted to say is when we don't have to be stuck in the doom and gloom. Here's a nice thought. If you go back in time, and I agreed you have to go back a long way. If you go back to 1344, Saturn and Neptune have met up before at 1 degree of Aquarius. Now, I know they're going to meet up at 0 degrees of Aries shortly. I know that. But And if you go back over thousands of years, yes, probably you could create a mandala that shows that the two of them have met up on every degree of the zodiac at some point. But actually, they're only meeting up every few decades. But as it happened, they did meet up at 1 degree Aquarius, which is where Pluto is now. And that was when the stones were laid down for this amazing cathedral that was built in 1344. It took a hell of a long time to build the thing. And at the same time, other cathedrals were brought into being. I think we should look at, as astrologers, I think that's what we need to fixate on is the fact we're not going to build cathedrals this time, but it's cathedrals in the mind, right? I think we can actually up our game quite a lot. And we are going to be creating things. The architecture that comes now is probably going to be absolutely amazing. We're also going to travel through space. We're going to learn more about the ocean. It's not all gloom and doom. That said, I do, of course, know that Saturn and Neptune are going to meet up together at 0 degrees of Aries, which is considered to be the world axis. Now, if you're not familiar with this idea, I know the seasons don't actually work the way that they used to do, but it was the case that the 0 degrees of the cardinals marked the different seasons of the year. So 0 degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn marked milestones, which were celebrated in practically every culture. It is a really profound degree, 0 degrees of Aries. If you lived on Mars or Venus or whatever, it would have no relevance whatsoever. It's because we're on Earth. It's because of where we are as our relationship with the sun. So it is a big story. Now, yes, absolutely. If I did, and I'm not doing it now, if you looked at the history of dis-ease, you can find a correlation between the Saturn-Neptune cycle and dis-ease on the planet. Yes, you can. But you could also find architectural styles. You can find music styles. We don't have to look down the negative stuff all of the time. Now, everybody's fixated, or it seems to me everyone's fixated on February of next year. But actually, the two of them are going to meet up earlier. From a heliocentric perspective, they'll meet up on the 11th of December of this year. And as it happens, when they do, this is the heliocentric version, Mercury will be at 26 degrees of Virgo, which is give or take about 90 degrees away from the galactic center. So, mark the 11th of December in your diary because that's a possible day for flying a different type of kite, maybe, right? But also tuning into a different kind of music, a different kind of dance. But something positive could happen. It's not imperative that this is going to be a difficulty. That said, I do wonder whether or not we're going to have to cope with some form of dis-ease over this next 18 months. And I am concerned that we might have a form of COVID again, and that therefore we need to keep ourselves as healthy as possible ahead of this thing. So the purpose of this talk was to cover the 7 years between now and 2032. I chose the picture here because I just want you to think of the idea of us surfing different waves, but simultaneously. So we have several cycles that we've got to go through. We've got to decode these, which is not easy. I'm fast forwarding now to where we're going to end up. I want to take us on a journey from today through to 2032. And the date that I've chosen in 2032 is the date of the next Saturn-Uranus conjunction, which will be at 28 degrees of Gemini, more or less opposing the galactic center. Now, I'm going to show you a lot of charts this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are. But I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on each of them. I'm simply highlighted the bits that I think are valuable information for us to hold. So first of all, learn today that we're going to have a Saturn-Uranus conjunction at 28 degrees of Gemini, which is, again, very close to one of the cardinal points. I'd also like you to note that when that happens, the nodes will be straddling across 7 degrees of Scorpio and 7 degrees of Taurus. And that axis is super important for us. The news this week, at the beginning of this week, was absolutely awful. the very idea that the Polish airspace should have been, assaulted or transgressed, whatever the word is for this, by apparently Russian drones is really worrying, because now, of course, we have to be fearful of the prospect of war in Europe. So this picture here is just to show you, look, there's quite a long space really between Russia and Poland, if you're not familiar with this, with Belarus in the middle. And Belarus at the moment is working more with the Russians, hence they're able to do all of this. That incursion into that space happened just after that lunar eclipse at the weekend, which, as you'll see, the reverberations of that eclipse are going to be felt for years. If I go back, bear with me for a minute, we're going back to that map in a moment. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to happen at 0 degrees of Aries. If you go back, you would discover that there was another one in 1738, which wasn't at 0 degrees of Aries, but it was at 0 degrees of Cancer, which is another, on that cardinal axis. And it's amazing to look back at the history of that time. It was a bit of a political debacle at that time too. And the little box that I've put there, you can see there's Uranus, which was out of bounds, hence it's in a different color. And it was in contraparallel with the sun. So it was a time of political disturbance. And look what happened. The Russian army began its attempts to cross the Dniester River and fails after 3 weeks. It was later decimated by plague. Now, that's quite something, because I think we know, if you have read Mundane Astrology, the book by Michael Bajan, Nick Campion, and Charles Harvey, they have a chapter in there where they talk about how Russia has, well, the Soviet Union rather, responded to the Saturn-Neptune cycle. And absolutely, Russia is playing a big role presently, again, as we approach this Saturn-Neptune. Sadly, I think that we're also, if there is dis-ease next year, it may be dis-ease that's one of the things that brings the present hostilities to a halt. Although, truthfully speaking, I do think that we've got a few years of this to go. Now, I asked you before to hold on to that 7 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. I didn't know about this chart until recently, and I'm really sorry that I didn't know about it earlier, because it's a fabulous chart. I've now called it the Vice chart of mankind, but I should really be honoring somebody called Mies, Meece. And if you can find his horoscopes for the new millennium, it's the most stunning book. It's brilliant. And in that, what he proposed is that there are charts of mankind, in other words, charts that cover whole generations. And his proposal was that you use the chart for the eclipse that immediately preceded the most recent Neptune-Pluto conjunction, which was in about 1892. And if you do that, this is the chart. Please copy it, because it's a brilliant chart to work with. That eclipse happened with the sun and moon at 7 degrees of Taurus. And when you've got time, go back through the history of the 20th century, and you'll find that although the world wars and things, it's that axis that is always affected. I've also highlighted in this that 24 degrees of Capricorn, and that's because there's going to be a solar eclipse on that degree in January of 2029, which is, I think, when things are really going to start to change, right? I mean, they're changing all the time, but when we feel that there's a dynamic shift and people are looking for more, they're putting more energy into putting things right than being destructive. This is a difficult chart. Do spend time with it, but you can see the whole political theme of the present age with the sun and moon opposing Uranus. So now we should have a quick look at Poland, that suffered this incursion just the other night. What I've done here, shortage of time and things, I've put 2 charts together. On the inner wheel here is the chart for Poland. the most recent chart for Poland goes back to just after the war, 28th of June 1945. So it's an early degree of Cancer, which means that it's going to have to cope with both Saturn and Neptune squaring its sun position in the next couple of years. And on the outside, I've put the recent one for Russia. And the present Russia goes back to the 25th of December 1991. And in all of this, can we just honor Dr. Nick Campion, who's the one who's provided us with all this data, which is amazing. So when you put the two charts together, you can see the friction between them. Russia's Chiron is exactly on Poland's Pluto, both of them at 8 degrees of Leo, which for me is only 1 degree away from the vice chart of mankind, which, 7 degrees of the fixed signs, Taurus and Scorpio. So that rather suggests, this is a big story here. The bigger story, though, is that Russia has a Venus-Pluto conjunction in 21, 22 degrees of Scorpio, which opposes Poland's Venus. So the two Venuses are virtually in opposition with one another. And there's a real can I say that? I desire thing that Russia has for the Polish area. What, of course, I didn't know, and I'm only really just getting to grips with Sedna now, is that Russia's Sedna at 11 degrees of Taurus, and that's a critical degree too for Europe, is on the Mars position for Poland. So these are all stress points, and they're going to be stressed now for the next few years. On top of that, there is a nodal thing between them. Russia's north node is on Poland's south node. So there is a destiny thing here. As it happens, there will be a solar eclipse in November of 2031. I'm going to give you a list of eclipses in a minute, and you'll see that rather suggests that the nature of the relationship will change dramatically in 2031, but we're not there yet. Now, I promised you a list. So I've only done the solar eclipses over the next few years, and you will have a copy of this, by the way. And these are the critical degrees for the next few years. Please don't think about your own charts for the moment, but just look at the pattern. You can see where the eclipses are. And I've also created this thing for you, which is you've got a graphic image now from the present all the way through to 2032. And on the left-hand side of the page, you've got the 360 degrees of the zodiac. You've got the new and full moons, and I've highlighted the red ones are highlighting each solar eclipse. And you see the pattern of them, obviously, and the yellow ones that are highlighted are the lunar eclipses that go with them. And I wanted you just to see how close these come to the outer planets, because that is critical. When an outer planet lines up with a solar eclipse, the impact is really considerable. And the most obvious one really is the one in 2029 here, where the solar eclipse, when we do the chart for it, will also configure with this planet here, which if we trace it back, that's the planet Uranus. So it looks as though just even on the basis of just this picture, we can say that there is a political change going to come, a dramatic one, which is in 2029. So my brief, or rather the brief I gave myself, right, was to look at the few years between now and 2032. But to do that, I needed to go back. If I was going to finish with the Saturn-Uranus in 2032, I needed to start somewhere. And we go back then to 1988, which is when the two planets, again, Saturn and Uranus, met up at 29 degrees of Sagittarius, virtually, again, at 0 degrees Capricorn, not quite, but very close also to the galactic center. So this particular Saturn-Uranus cycle, I think, is more momentous than any of the others that have happened before. We're tuning on to, as I said, I think this is a different frequency. If we go back to 1988, it was in the year following that. When you think Saturn and Uranus are a political, you've got that Saturn is authoritarian, as you know, and Uranus is, I want to do something different. It's a little bit anarchic. Put the two of them together, you had a political struggle. And within a year of those two planets meeting, the Berlin Wall, which some of you were probably too young to know about, the Berlin Wall came down overnight. It was an extraordinary time to be living. It was really quite amazing. Nobody could have imagined that was going to happen. Now, it didn't happen on the day of the Saturn-Uranus thing. The wall did not, Humpty Dumpty did not fall off that wall that particular day. It happened a year later, and that's the chart for when it happened. This is important to us because if we're going to look for walls falling, which I think we aren't, then we've also got to look to see what happens just after the next Saturn-Uranus alignment. So the wall came down when Saturn and Neptune, Saturn had moved away from the Uranus to meet up with Neptune. And the wall came down with both of them at 10 degrees of Capricorn, opposing Jupiter, which was delightfully at 10 degrees of Cancer. I mean, it was astrologically exquisite, and with the moon at 0 degrees of Aries. So we really want to look, if we're thinking, is there going to be the kind of political change that happened with that? We want to find something that mirrors that in the future. So how many walls are there to collapse? Well, I'm assuming that the Great Wall of China is not going to collapse. It's been there for a long time. The Berlin Wall is down. There was, you may have forgotten it now, but through the Iraq War, we were fixated nightly on the news and saw walls going up in Baghdad. They were wire frames, but it was really awful. We've also got Mr. Trump's big, beautiful wall. Is that going to fall down? There's the longest fence, apparently, in the world is on the border between India and Bangladesh. A much more vicious and unkind wall exists. It's the Moroccan wall that lasts for 1,700 miles and goes, most of it, of course, is through kind of uninhabitable land through the Sahara. But it's a long, long wall to keep peoples apart. I'm not sure that that's going to be sustainable. And then, of course, you know, close to home, we've had the walls that went up in Belfast that divided communities. But I think Saturn-Uranus coming together is going to see another wall collapse. So I went to look to see when would that be. And just slightly out of my frame, so in other words, just slightly away from, Saturn has to move on a bit. The Saturn-Uranus alignment is at the end of Gemini. So they will, both of them have moved along just a little bit by the 8th of June of 2033. And at that point, I looked at this chart and thought this is quite an interesting date because the moon and node will both be at 19 degrees of Libra, opposing Neptune with the south node. So I looked at that and thought that's quite interesting. And Mars will be opposing Mercury that day. Now, I don't have to be right about this. I might not even live long enough for this one, but I do think walls of some kind will collapse following the Saturn-Uranus. Now, for them to collapse, there has to be the desire for a very big change. And I think this next few years is about recalibration of what people really want and desire. I do think that our world is going to be very, very different by 2033. This is like a child's painting of how the countries are. But already borders are collapsing, and I expect the picture in 2033 will be substantially different. I don't want us to fall into a black hole. I'm taking us back now to our chart for when I started at 5 o'clock. Today, Jupiter is at 19 degrees of Cancer, opposing this black hole that we've gone past that was at 19 degrees of Capricorn, and that we're still I think it's still resonating. So I think what we're going through now is like the dirty bit of the soup. And I'm hopeful that once we're past this, we can get into something brighter. So this chart here, 360 degrees of the zodiac down the left-hand side, and the curly lines going across the page are the outer planets, and each one of the dots is where you can see that the planet is going from one sign to another. So here's our friend Jupiter. Oh, sorry, you've got the years at the top, 26, 27, and so on. Here's our friend Jupiter, which changes signs about once every year. Right? So a dot for every year, if you're not familiar with this. There's the lunar node, which is going backwards and changing sign about every 18 months. Uranus, which some of you will know, is playing on the border between Taurus and Gemini now. and in 2026 will cross April 26. It will go firmly into Gemini, and that's it then, right? It's staying until 2032. That's when it moves into Cancer. So we've got this long Jupiter bit. Chiron will move in 2026 through 27. It dances between Aries and Taurus, but once it's into Taurus in 27, that's it for a long time. Saturn is going to go into Aries, which you know, and then it will join Chiron in Taurus in 2028. Neptune, once it's into Aries, that's it for the time frame that we're talking about. So the big changes, the really big gear changes, and the new sounds that are coming in, they will come in 26 and 27, 28, and then it's more regular. So we've got it's a noise, it's a cacophony, right? It's like the entire brass department going mental for the next couple of years. So I think our world is going to change. I think that will be as much to do with climate change and the fact that people have to move elsewhere in order to be able to feed themselves, as much as it is to do with politics. So here, I want to focus on where I think the hardest bits are. This time, instead of looking at 360 degrees of the zodiac, I've just done it into a 90-degree graph. And I've highlighted the bits where planets are either going to be conjunct or at right angle or at 180 degrees from one another. And the concentration is from about the third quarter of 2028 through until 2030. And the hard bit really is in 2028, because what we have is we've got a mixture of Pluto, Saturn, and Chiron, all in some convoluted dance together. Now, we haven't lived through this in this way, because we're going to have Saturn going through Saturn and Chiron in Taurus, and Pluto in Aquarius. These are fixed signs. These are really stubborn. Have you ever tried to persuade a Taurus or an Aquarius to alter direction? It takes monumental effort, right? But of course, when they do change direction, they charge off at speed. You know, the bull in the china shop business. That's where the real heart of things are. That's what you need to look at your own chart for 28 and 29. So one of the questions that I posed, and because people ask all the time, is, will we have a recession? Or are things going to keep going up? Right? Nothing can keep going up forever. It doesn't make any sense. Right? There has to be a rhythm. Night follows day, day follows night. Right? There is a classic rhythm. Louise McWhirter, who was somebody who apparently worked with the great Gann, who was the financial astrologer, but with also other astrologers, came up with this thing which absolutely works in the United States. I would argue it doesn't work so well in other countries, but it's variations on a theme. And what she showed here is the business cycle, and that prices tended to go up when the node was going through Leo, right, and fell down when the node was going through Pisces. So where we are now, the node is going through Pisces, prices are down when the node is in Aquarius. Where we are now, the node is going through Pisces, so we're about to go into the downward trend. That's the first thing. So I did some work on this. Recessions are always caused by different things, right? There isn't an economic formula that applies for every single recession. They're driven by different things. But if we go back through the 20th century, and I can do it for the 19th, but I can't, I've got too much to do today. If I do that, I can find a pattern to recessions. So on the left-hand side here, the left-hand column, you've got two Scorpios followed by more or less two Sagittarius, or 3 Sagittarius, Capricorn, and then what's it going to be for 28? Now, what that is, that tells you the sign that Jupiter was traveling in. On the right-hand side, there's another pattern, and this is the pattern created by the lunar node, which in 1902 was crossing the Capricorn-Aquarius boundary. In 1920, the Leo-Virgo one. But can you see there's a pattern there as well? Now, if we follow the pattern through, then the likelihood is that there will be a recession in 2028. my colleague Grace Morris is saying that actually we could feel it from 2027, and I'm not going to disagree with that. I think what we're looking at is 27, 28 as being a time when property prices will be at their lowest. Now, obviously, every situation is different. This is a global thing, though. But we are seeing, when I'm talking to the economist friends now and people who study the property cycle, they look for signs. And one of the big signs that they look for is, no pun intended there, is they look for when there's going to be a really big building. And as soon as they see that somebody is reaching for the stars, they know that if it's going beyond whatever mankind has done before, as soon as that happens, the fall is going to happen soon afterwards. So we're about 18 months off that, which should concur then with Grace's view that it might be 2027. I'm going to go a little bit more for 2028. And that's because I'm concerned about the eclipse that is in January of 2028, which is at 6 degrees of Aquarius, when the sun and moon will also be conjunct Pluto. I'm concerned about that, as just that little configuration worries me a little bit. It's too much heavy emphasis in Aquarius, which can be a bit, I am not going to move. This is my opinion. We also have them more or less at right angles to Chiron. And I think it's a difficult picture. Right? And Jupiter also at right angles to the galactic center. So I think, going back to my musical terms, I think that's a symbol crash. I think that's something that's really quite harsh at the beginning of 2028. Rather more worrying is what happens 6 months later, which is the 8th of June of 2028, when Saturn and Chiron align at exactly 6 degrees and 51 minutes of Taurus, which is, we're back onto that chart of mankind, right? We're bringing that round. Now, Saturn and Chiron, are they best buddies? I'm not really sure about that. How are they going to react when they're in Taurus, which is a land sign, an earth sign? Right? Is this saying something about the quality of Earth? Right? Is that going to be compromised in some way? The moon that day will also be out of bounds as it happens. Right? So, and I'm concerned that we've got Mercury retrograde there with Venus. Right? So the middle of June of 2028, I think, would not be the time to be trying to put your property on the market. But let's go back to Europe for a minute, because we're going to have to decide whether or not we think Europe is going to go to war or not. There are various charts for Europe, and I've just singled out two. There was the Treaty of Versailles, which was in June of 1919, post the First World War. And the whole idea then was, let's never do this again. Right? Let's have a deal, and we won't compromise it. Unfortunately, as you can see with the chart, you've got a lot of concentration of planets all in one kind of segment of the zodiac. And as shown in the box on the left-hand side, you have the Sun and Mars in exact parallel with one another. The Sun and Mars together doesn't actually kind of speak of peace to me anyway. And as we know, the peace did not last. Neptune, by the way, was at 7 degrees of Leo, squaring the mankind axis. So it was a lovely dream, but it didn't, the insufficient substance. We're a bit short on the earth signs here and the practicalities. The Treaty of Rome, though, is the chart that we use more often. It was agreed on the 25th of March of 1957, but it didn't become operational until January of 1958. I prefer, but obviously in my own work I'm using both charts, but for today I'm going back to the original Treaty of Rome, the March chart, because I think it tells more of the story of what's going on presently. Now, it's too messy, and you can't read that well enough. Certainly I can't. But you can read where I've highlighted in the yellow bits over on the left-hand side. There was a Mars-Pluto parallel. Well, that again, that's not exactly peace-orientated. And you have Saturn in contra-parallel with Uranus, which doesn't imply political shared views. It's more about trying to bring oppositions together. But it's a slightly ugly chart. If I just do this with it, if I strip away the aspects, will you now look and see what we have is we have a colossal T-square with the moon opposing Uranus and squaring Neptune. And presently, of course, Pluto is going past the moon. Now, if the moon represents the peoples, right, which it's supposed to do, right, we have been living with peoples who have very different political agendas, that's the Uranus thing, and very different creative and spiritual moves as well, and trying, as T-squares do, trying to bring them all together, and very Neptunian thing. We can do it with some unconditional love if we can manage it. That's all compromised presently by the fact that the solar eclipse that's coming up is exactly opposing the Venus of this chart. But then it's also we're going to have to deal with the fact that Neptune is going to go past the Sun position, as indeed is Saturn. Going back to earlier this year, there was a solar eclipse on March the 29th, if I remember correctly, at 9 degrees of Aries. So there was an eclipse on its Mercury. So there was trouble ahead. All the clues were there, and that eventually led to the, what's it called now? I can't remember the word that Mr. Starmer's used to try and bring everyone together in order to defend Ukraine from the threat of Russia. And if you remember, all the European leaders ran apparently to pay homage to Mr. Trump, who was apparently going to sort it all out, and it was all going to be wonderful. You can actually see the stresses and things were already there from this chart. Now, this is a chart for Ukraine, which goes back to the 1st of December 1991. You might remember that Russia was the 25th, so Ukraine is in fact slightly older than Russia, only by a few days. But it's got Saturn at 2 degrees of Aquarius. So Pluto is attacking this Saturn now. So its structure and everything is compromised presently. It's also got an out of bounds Mercury. And I think most people would agree that part of the difficulty with Ukraine is that Mr. Zelensky is permanently on a communication crusade, trying to persuade people to give them the assistance that they need. It's a tricky chart anyway. It's got Mars and Saturn in parallel. It's quite a hard chart, but it's a very optimistic one. The Sun in Sagittarius, it wants to be friendly with everyone. It actually wants to solve people's problems. It's got a nice trine going between the Sun and Chiron. But nevertheless, somehow or other, Pluto's got to get past 2 degrees of Aquarius. It's also got to get over that descendant position because this is an accurate chart. Now, going back then to Russia's chart, and remember it's a little bit younger, right? Russia's midheaven is more or less exactly on that chart of mankind, the Taurus bit there. Russia has a tricky chart. It's born that little bit later. It's not a Sagittarius, it's a Capricorn. Right? And it definitely does have ambition, there's no question. Saturn opposes the Chiron. The administration, there's certainly something, we could argue about and talk all the time about the potential for corruption and difficulties that it's got. But if you look again at the parallels over here, you have Mars, the Sun, and Uranus all in parallel with one another. It's determination. And presently, of course, we've got Pluto, which is also out of bounds, by the way, at 23 degrees, affecting all of that. So there is presently, there's a toxicity going on. And that, I think, is going to last for a little bit longer. I think, and did think right from, February of 2022, that this is a 7-year war. I don't want to think like that. But if you look at this and look how the number 7 keeps coming up here. 7 degrees of Sagittarius were rising. So that means that if you were doing converse arcs 7 years later, the converse ascendant would go back into Scorpio. That's number 1. Number 2, there's 7 degrees between the Sun and Jupiter. So that progressed Sun, or directed, whichever you want to do, the progressed Sun will move on to the Jupiter in 7 years. There's more or less, well, it's actually 8 degrees between the Mercury and the Saturn. You can find 6 between the Venus and Pluto. You can do all of this yourselves. But for me, I think this thing is not going to be over fully until the early part of 2029. And that fits in with that eclipse and everything else that I'm looked at. And the real thing is how many of us are going to be drawn into this in 2028. This is just here, I've put the 2 charts together, the Ukraine itself and the invasion. I think the invasion, it's expressed best really with the fact that Chiron was crossing its midheaven. And maybe, that happens to the rest of us as well. Chiron going over the midheaven, you can feel as though, sometimes if I've had clients who've got at work, they feel a kind of slight loss of status because somebody has, the company has changed the rules. Somehow they've changed titles and they feel sidelined. There is something of a takeover mission with that. Now, what we need, of course, is NATO to step in and stop all the problems, and that would be really nice. But I'm not sure that it can. NATO has been in a weakened state in recent times. NATO, and this is an accurate chart again, the ascendant is 2 degrees of Scorpio. Boom, with Pluto squaring that ascendant. The thing that looks like a percentage sign, which you may not be familiar with, is Astrea, the asteroid, which often shows up whenever there's a contract or a general agreement. There's something legally binding whenever that's involved. And Pluto has been opposing that. And what happened was that there's been this thing about who's funding NATO, who should be paying for it. So there's been a whole values crisis since Pluto took up that opposition. I'm concerned about what's going to happen now with the eclipse coming up in just over a week's time, which is at 28 degrees of Virgo, which is exactly on the Ceres position. I hope the thing won't crumble, but I'm also aware that the nodes at the moment are about, 18 degrees of Pisces. They're moving backwards through the zodiac. So they're going to oppose the Saturn, the Moon, and the Sun, and then the Pluto. NATO, somehow or other, is going to have to get better funding. It's been put and compromised, really, and put into a weakened position. If I look further and look at its progressions for today, Neptune is now more or less with the South Node, so that you can see that that's where it's weakened. And that eclipse the other night, that lunar eclipse, was more or less exactly on the progressed Saturn position. So you can see that the concern must be, how can it fund itself? And particularly now that Russia has developed these extraordinary drones with this long range capacity. Yes, I mean, there is a lot for us to be concerned about. But we're going to cross over now and move over to the United States. Sorry, I couldn't get a better map. That's a bit colorful, a bit childlike. But I did feel, and when I wrote the original Financial Universe book back in 2004, I didn't see that the United States could continue in the form that it had. Now, rather than go into a whole thing about which chart do you use for the United States, I decided to take the chart for its constitution. Please ignore the ascendant and the midheaven thing. I don't have an accurate time for this. But what I do know, right, I do more or less know exactly what was going on the day itself. Mars over here was with the South Node, parallel to the South Node, just slightly out of bounds. But the big story here is that we have Venus exactly opposing Sedna, and that was affected by the lunar eclipse the other night. We've also got nodes which are more or less on the world axis and which are going to be affected by both Saturn and Neptune very soon. Now, this will be the first time that Saturn and Neptune together have affected that cardinal thing, because the other chart I showed you was for 1738, pre the Constitution. So the Constitution of the US has been, and I think it continues to be, under significant stress. There is a wonderful historian who's writing at the moment, Heather Cox Richardson, and I'm following the nearly daily things now, where she's amazing. She comes up with all these dates from the past, but you can see the stress that the Constitution is under, and I'm actually not sure that it can survive in its present form. That takes us then to the inauguration for earlier this year, which you may remember had that very difficult Grand Cross formation with Mercury at right angles to Chiron, at right angles to Mars, at right angles to the Moon. And it should really be no surprise at all that we've had all the trade disagreements. But it's also been extremely muddly. And the configuration of that is all those planets in Pisces, right? Where there's a lack of clarity. Are the tariffs going to happen or are they not going to happen? Right? We aren't going to know that yet. We've known really, astrologers have known from the start we weren't going to know about which way the tariffs were going to go until Saturn gets completely past that nodal position. This is now a crisis, as I think we'd all agree. It's a massive crisis. It's a crisis with the solar eclipse that's coming in just a week's time that is on the south node of this. So this chart is still, every chart is always working. But you can follow the transits to this chart and you can find, if you need to look for a tariff story, just look at the transits to this one. Anytime, even the moon going past 18, 19 degrees of any of the cardinal signs, you see a shake-up and a bit more of a story from the tariff point of view. What we have here is the constitution on the inside and on the outside, the inauguration chart. And I just wanted you to see just how much stress there was. The key thing was that at the inauguration, Saturn was going past the Sedna position of the constitution. So, and that is saying, well, actually, what is this constitution? How is it going to work? It's hold on a minute. It's not. Is it right for all the people? Because Saturn is also opposing the Venus. So the stress that the thing is going through can actually be seen. It's just part of the transits. But the transits will pass, as do the node thing. It's a crisis now, right? But I don't think it will be forever. What we can do is we can fast forward. That's the beauty of astrology. We don't have to live in today. We can go someplace else. And if we fast forward to the inauguration in 2029, and look to see how much of this is going to be going on then, assuming, of course, that there is an election in 2028. But if there is, then there is the Americans have a definite system. 20th of January, midday, or just after midday, they swear in the new president. So we can do it again. So I've taken the time, actually, it was 1220 this year. I've done that again now for 2029. And what I was looking to see was, first of all, 18, 19 degrees of the cardinals. Is that going to show up again? Well, it doesn't quite. Right? Not quite. There's echoes of it, but it's not direct. But we've also got the moon and Neptune in a conjunction. The moon is on a very sensitive financial degree of 8 degrees of Aries, so it looks a bit weakened then, so it doesn't look very healthy for the dollar. But this Pluto will have moved away from the sun. And Pluto is then coming into making, or rather Uranus will have been in a trine with the Pluto. It's quite a different picture that's coming up. There is a kite formation in there. So it may be that they try and fly some new kind of idea in 2029. I don't know that it's going to please everyone, but it's a staging post along the way. Venus and Uranus will be in contraparallel with one another. And that rather says, the split, the continuing split between two sides, probably in this case between the haves and the have-nots. But there's a potential for things altering course. And the potential is there in that the south node will be at 13 degrees of Cancer, which is the USA's solar position for the 4th of July. That's also in square to Mars, right? So it might be an uncomfortable thing, as though you were turning around a boat. You wouldn't turn around the boat too quickly because it will topple over. But it does suggest that there will be an alteration in the direction. Just prior to the eclipse, to the inauguration, which is on the 20th of January, there will be a solar eclipse just a few days later on the 14th. And that's a very different picture there. And I'm starting my diary notes now, looking at the transits to this. Now, if this one will come into being with Venus at right angles to Mars. So I haven't done it for today, but what I will be doing is I will be looking at the Venus-Mars cycle to see how that fits in with this, to see how the political, if you think of it as being opposing forces, male, female, or, Republican, Democrat, whatever, we need to go back to the year before. It would be quite interesting actually to work on it collectively and see how we feel about this. But there are a few elements here that make me think there might be attempts towards reconciliation, particularly with the Mars opposing Neptune. Going slightly north for a moment, we go into Canada. And this is Canada's chart. Now, again, I know that Canada's got several charts and some people prefer the Scorpio one. I'm choosing today the 1st of July because they celebrate their birthday then. And I think if a country celebrates, then we should use that one. But it's had a bit of a crisis because that lunar eclipse was again within a couple of degrees of its nodal axis, and its nodal axis squares its Venus. It's Venus in Gemini, and what's it done? It's fallen out with its neighbor, or rather, its neighbor's fallen out with it. What's going to happen next? Well, Saturn is definitely going into Aries. It's not skipping a sign. So Saturn is going to go, and in fact, Saturn gets stuck at 14 degrees of Aries next year. It stations there. So Saturn is going to station on Canada's Neptune. And I leave it to you to think about what that might mean. But it also suggests with Saturn going over its ascendant, which when that happens with a person, Saturn's the planet with the rings. It's the planet about commitment. So some people choose to get divorced then, some people get married then, but it's a crisis, it's a relationship crisis. I suspect that's going to be more with its next door neighbor. It was rather extraordinary that Mark Carney got the job under the lunar eclipse that I think was on the 14th of March, earlier this year anyway. So he got the job actually under an eclipse, which is kind of quite interesting. But his chart is amazing because his chart picks up exactly the lunar eclipse that we've just had. He has this extraordinary grand cross. I mean, obviously you can do the chart yourself, but Saturn, for him, he's had his Saturn return and he got the job more or less as Saturn was going past his sun, and he's really had to take on immense responsibility. But again, the crisis came this week with this lunar eclipse, and it makes me wonder now, who is he actually going to be making friends with? Sorry, I should have put this in there, but if you go back to that eclipse list that I gave you, there's a solar eclipse going to pick up on his ascendant and his Jupiter in a couple of years' time. So I do wonder if he's going to go off and do another job and not actually stay as a premier or whatever they call it there. Mexico is the other one we have to look at. I've been choosing to use the chart for the 16th of September, 1810. I've chosen to use it because I think it's ringing true with the recent the tariffs that were imposed on them. It has its Mercury at 18 degrees of Libra, which is exactly where the moon was on the inauguration chart. And Mexico was, faced with really considerable tariffs and shocks and what have you. Pluto, again, the lunar eclipse picked it up. But there's a much, much bigger tale to tell here because Uranus is going over its Jupiter. And suddenly it's, Uranus, whenever Uranus is involved, you're looking at something that is unprepared, right? The unexpected, something deviant, something different. It's going across its Jupiter, and suddenly Mexico is making friends in new places. It's got Jupiter in the 9th house. And I think many people might have been surprised at some of the connections that have been made. No chart is perfect, and this one is a difficult one. The Sun opposes Pluto, the Sun in Virgo, right? It's a bit, paper ready, a bit admin ready maybe. But now with this Jupiter, I do wonder, are they going to join forces with Canada? Are they going to become part of a new trading bloc? Very, very interesting. And this is just looking at the transits, right? But it too, it came into being under a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So it's going to tune into the new Saturn-Neptune next year. And I think with a bit of boldness, is going to step forward. Its leader, Claudia Scheinbaum, she has the moon at 0 degrees of Aries. So she's going to get bombed by both the Saturn and the Neptune. I wonder what that will mean for her at any level. Her Uranus, though, is very, very close to Mr. Trump's ascendant. So she must be a bit of an irritant for him. I think we should watch this space because the node is going to go past her Chiron and her Jupiter. I think she may be quite a force to be reckoned with at the beginning of next year. But whether or not that's sustained, I'm not sure, because I mean, we don't know. But she is going to have to deal with Saturn is going to station on her descendant. Now, this could, of course, be her private life. It doesn't have to be, her central political role. But I do wonder what the moves will be in Mexico. And going back to my thinking about that wall eventually coming down, and I was looking, I work for somebody in Mexico, and I've been working for him for better part of 20 years. And he quite often reminds me that I said that the border between the US and Mexico would alter in the middle of in this decade. And he keeps saying to me, we're at 2025 now, Christine, when's it going to happen? But I do wonder whether or not California mightn't, become more aligned with Mexico, or maybe it's going to be Canada. I don't know. But if we look at the progressions here, Mexico is definitely going to be big time in the news next year. That it's progressed Mercury. It's already in the news. Progressed Mercury, 8 degrees of Taurus, and both Saturn and Neptune, and Saturn and Chiron are headed there. I wonder, given that it came into being with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, I wonder what plants grow there, and whether or not we're going to, some pharmaceutical thing is going to come from there, some drugs that will be really magical, really amazing. And I hope it's not Pollyanna thinking, but I just think it's got a sustained Uranus transit over the Jupiter. And I think we're going to hear many, many surprises coming from Mexico. The Middle East, I didn't even know where to start with this. As I said, I gave myself far too much to do. A few months ago, I was in Turkey, and I was discussing with owner Dosa there. We were looking at the chart for the solstice, the summer solstice. And I had some concern about the pending full moon, which was on the 10th of July. And my concern was that the full moon was going to be 18, almost 19 degrees of Cancer Capricorn, which was going to pick up on the tariff thing from the inauguration. I was concerned about that. Also, at that point, there was some concern, as there has been daily, about what would happen with Israel and Gaza. And what concerned me at the time was that the full moon was going to be exact over Doha in Qatar. And drawing the chart then, we saw that both Chiron and Eris would be rising. And I was hopeful at the time, because I'm Pollyanna land, I was hoping that because I knew there was some kind of peace meeting going on, I hoped that there would be some reconciliation, some peace thing. But I was also aware of 19 degrees of Capricorn and this black hole that's there. Now, as we know, there was an attack again with the lunar eclipse just the other day. This is the chart for Qatar. The solar eclipse is exact on its Pluto in 10 days' time. That attack, I think, involved many more countries than have been listed so far. It's been suggested, Israel attacked Hamas, the Hamas people who were in Qatar. But we now know that UK planes were there, may have been others. Certainly, Mr. Trump must have said it was okay for that attack to happen. So Qatar is very, very much in the news, and I think will continue to be, given that Chiron, this 13 degrees of Aries, Saturn is going to station there. Now, if Chiron, if it sees Chiron, and look at that kite formation there, if its role as being the problem place, the place where problems are solved, political problems get solved here. I'm hopeful, of course I'm hopeful, that when Saturn sits on top of the Chiron, that some solution will be found. We can only watch and learn. Israel's chart, and I don't want to spend time on this, I just simply want to show you that Israel's chart is affected by all sorts of things, particularly a series of 3 eclipses. The January 2029 one, which I've mentioned, will be more or less exact on its IC. The one in 2030 is exact on its Mercury. The one in 2031 aligns with its Chiron and its node. So the story of Israel is indeed a painful, difficult story. But perhaps it needs a reformat, and perhaps those eclipses will bring that reformat. There is no chart for Gaza. What there is a chart for Palestine and an agreement that was made in Cairo in Egypt. This chart is actually set for Jerusalem, but at the time that the thing was signed in Cairo. And this was the Palestine one that supposedly was supposed to give security for the Gaza region. As we know, it's done anything but. But it's a very tricky chart, this one. The moon is exact on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, which I think is really a tricky one, because if you think of the moon as being the people, we've got people in a weakened state. We've also got the Uranus Hygeia midpoint there. So that says something about the health of the people, which we know now it must be just hellish. It must just really be diabolical. Uranus has been opposing the Pluto of this, and the place, as we know, has been bombed to smithereens. If we're looking for any good news here at all, the good news has surely got to be that Jupiter will eventually do some magic. But I think we're kind of stuck with this until the nodes go past that Saturn and the moon. I know there's far more that we could talk about with this. I just want to say I think that there is some hope, but unfortunately, I don't think it's tomorrow. Now, none of this stuff would be happening in the Middle East if we weren't all greedy for oil, right? The Americans would never have been out there, right? We wouldn't have been out there. The British really sodded it all up after the First World War, right? Because once oil was found, everybody's greedy for that area. And I was reading this book about, the pipelines. It's awful. It's just really awful. So I think really everything goes back to this greed for oil. And please God, the sooner we come up with an alternative, the better. But this is the chart for oil. And I think it's one that you really want to print out and put on your fridge and learn, because I do think that we learn a lot from this. The IC of this chart, which is more or less exact, this was the reason that oil is measured in barrels is because it was a barrel that happened to be handy when the first oil came up. So they used that, and now it's measured like that. The first oil was brought up as Pluto was on the IC, which of course nobody knew at the time because Pluto hadn't been discovered then. But it's an amazing thing that that's exactly what happened. It's extraordinary too that there's a Chiron node conjunction. And each time there's been a real financial disaster, if you like, during the 20th century, it's always Chiron and the node coming together. That's one of the themes. So we need to watch this chart. We need to watch the progressions of this chart too. The Neptune-Pluto conjunction, which took place 7-8 degrees of Gemini, that's where the Uranus was in this chart. And really, if you want to follow the money since 1859, it's always been through the oil thing. So we need to be following this chart to see when the balance of power, when things might alter. Walls, and we want walls obviously to come down. China has the Great Wall of China. And if we look at its chart, which only, and listen, I know China goes back thousands and thousands of years, but its most recent legal formation goes back to the 1st of October 1949. And I'm grateful to Nick Campion again, because he's the one who got the radio broadcast and realized it must have been about 3:15 in the afternoon. Now, if that chart is accurate, then the ascendant is 5 degrees of Aquarius, but we can't be 100% sure. The moon won't have moved that much within the hour, so it's definitely the moon is about 3 degrees of Aquarius. So Pluto is on its way there. So it's reasonable for us to expect that there will be developments in the way that the people of that region think and feel. The Vesta is the thing that looks like a little flame there. Vesta is the trader's asteroid, almost at 0 degrees of the cardinals. and the solar eclipse that's coming up is going to affect that. So the news from China, which we're going to look at in a moment, right? There will be China, the ramifications of how China handles its money and its resources. That's going to color the next few years as well. Now, it has a Moon-Uranus contraparallel. And I think we can read into that we know it has, there is a very strong political party, but we also, most of us are kind of aware that there's also an undercurrent, there's another movement that isn't very happy with that particular party. That's ingrained, that's in its DNA, this struggle of trying to bring people together. I think we should just simply watch the chart. We know that Saturn is going to go through Aries. We know it's going to oppose all of those Libra planets. So at some level, China is going to be challenged over the next 18 months. But what I particularly wanted to look at here was this Yod configuration, the Moon with Chiron with Uranus. Now, I mean, going back years, I was hopeful that when Pluto opposed the Uranus position, I think most of us kind of thought maybe there would be a big shake-up in the political structure. It hasn't worked like that, but it has worked in the sense that it's really, it's incredibly strongly placed. They develop their ideas. They put so much into their university. They put so much into manufacturing, their technology, their experience, hugely creative place. And I think what comes out of there over the next few years could actually be really quite remarkable and transformative and in a really positive way. Now, what's already happened there is that blockchains, the cryptos, Saturn being block, Uranus being chain, right? Much of the crypto industry has actually come out of China, the good and the bad element of it. Cryptos are not going to go away. I know it's smokes and mirrors in many ways. I understand that, but it's not going to go away. The kind of money that we've had, it's gone past its sell-by date. We're now, most of us we're paying with our phones. We're doing the whole way in which we handle value and currencies is altering and at tremendous pace. I don't want to get into an argument about which chart to use for Bitcoin, but I do have a very good chart that has worked for me, which is the 9th of January. Most people use the 3rd of January in 2009. And the chart I'm offering you here I'm not using the time because I don't know the place, so there's no point in trying to do the houses of this. I'm also offering you the heliocentric version, which has a Mars-Pluto conjunction right at the beginning of Capricorn. And if that doesn't speak of a new financial era, I'm not sure what does. It came into being when Saturn and Uranus were halfway through their cycle. They're in their opposition phase. And I'm not showing you here, but in my monthly class things, I've shown how every time Saturn and Uranus make a formal aspect between themselves, right? And we've had quintiles recently, right? The price of Bitcoin shoots up it responds to Saturn Uranus. Right? You can't just trade on that, but it's good background noise. It gives you the framework for what's happening. Pluto, of course, has got to pass the Jupiter position of this heliocentrically as well. So the Bitcoin price, if you were holding it outside of and for longer than 2031, I think you probably do very well. So I'm coming to the end. You'll be pleased. My voice is going to go. The world is very definitely changing. Even newspapers, we're not going to have them. We barely have them now. We don't even know what news we can even trust. What we can trust is our charts. And we can also trust in the fact that we can have hope. We're each one of us people, if we're kind, hopefully things don't have to be too bad. We have gone through similar things before, right? Well, after the last war, the last World War, we set up the United Nations. It was supposed to solve everything. Unfortunately, it's not a balanced power, as we know. It has the declinations, Moon, Mars, and Uranus. Right. Well, that doesn't actually spell peace in any way. But the hope for peace was there with all of these planets in Libra in this seventh house here, but the sun at 1 degree and a bit of Scorpio. So that sun is being attacked presently by Haumea that I introduced you to earlier, and also by Pluto. And it's really, so it has to be reformatted. And I think we have to accept that the United Nations, as it stands, requires a shake-up. And maybe that's one of the good things that will happen over the next 18 months. This, though, its progress chart for just a few weeks ago in the middle of July. And this was my concern at that point. The progressed sun at 21 of Capricorn opposed Saturn at 21 of Cancer, with Sedna exactly between them. A T square, an awkward T square. It wasn't the only one. Chiron was opposing the Sedna with Saturn in between it. The United Nations has been under immense strain. And the coming solar eclipse, which will be at right angles to the nodal axis here, really says something about the fact it's not just Gaza, it's not just Ukraine, it's what's happening in the Bangladesh border. I mean, there are so many areas of the world that now require huge amounts of attention and peace structures. I think this is about the last chart, I think. So I wanted to finish on what I hoped was going to be a bright note. In 2028, which I agree is going to be a difficult year, and nothing happens quickly. As I said, you can't turn around a boat quickly, it'll topple over. Jupiter will go into Libra. If Libra does its job well, if it does, it should act as a good arbitrator and a diplomat. It's going to make eventually, it's going to make a very nice trine to both Uranus and Pluto. All of them in air signs. So perhaps thinking is going to change. Perhaps we're going to think and communicate better, because if we did that, then we'd get rid of wars. I said that I thought that maybe there would come a time when a wall would fall down. I don't think it can until after the 28th of June of 2032. But I think walls can come down then. And maybe part of what we're going through presently, and remember that by 2032, the nodal axis will be mirroring that chart of mankind axis. Maybe by then we'll be ready for a new age. Now, there are a lot of charts here. There were 70 odd charts. If you want the PDF of this, please just email my assistant. It's very simple, juliecityscopes@gmail.com, and she'll send this out to you tomorrow, the PDF. If you want to find other information, these are a few places to go. Please, please, and especially today, Sue Keents has done the most amazing thing about the assassination yesterday of Charlie King on the Astrology News Service site. It's a tremendous piece and it's lovely. It's a few minutes reader, but it's to the point and it's excellent. If you want to do further research, go to the alexandriaibase.org or the uraniatrust.org. I'm really proud to be involved with both of them. The articles on there are really super. And of course, there's NCGR, Geocosmic. I think I've managed to do this, Monica, with 3 minutes to spare. Or maybe
Thank you,
Monica's
Christine.
gone. Oh, I thought you'd run away.
I am here. I'm here. Okay. Do you want some questions or we finished?
Yes. Yeah. I'm finished. That's it. I was just going to say thank you. I do a monthly class if anybody wants to know, but Julie would tell you about that anyway. There we go. Oh, there's some stuff in the chat. Let me have a look. Let me see if I can get this. The dwarf article, Angie, that's on the Astrology News Service site. Thanks for that, Lynn. You've picked that up. Oh, Sue is there.
Gotta get it.
Sue, thank you. Yeah.
It was fabulous. I can't get my video on, but that was really unbelievable.
Okay, Christine, I think everybody enjoyed your webinar very much. There are no really questions in the chat box. So in the name of NCGR, we thank especially Christine to give us this very, very interested webinar. They give us a lot of information that he will have to study with it. So thank you everybody to be here. Thank you very much, Christine, to be with us. And we thank NCGR to give us the opportunity to have Christine with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking me. Thank you.
Well done, Christine.
It's done, Liz.
Beautiful work. So much work went into that. God almighty.
We could have a glass of water now, or can I have wine now?
You
Is that
should have
okay?
wine. Yeah.
That would be
Okay.
good. I'll
Thanks.
stop sharing and then I can just be here. Right. Oh, great. Terrific. I can breathe again.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
wonderful.
you, Christine.
Sue, thank you for being there.
You're welcome. Loved it. Everything was great.
Fabulous.
I just sent a chat about the Tuesday was the exact square of Haumea Pluto, and that's a black hole right there. I mean, it's the power is immense. So
Wasn't it?
no wonder.
Yeah.
Wonder.
Yeah. I had so many charts, Sue, and I couldn't, like
What
how
up?
much to get into this, There we go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, we've done good. Right. And thank you so much. Your article this morning was fantastic. I sent it to quite a few people.
Did you? Oh, thank you.
I forwarded it. Yeah.
I saw his chart. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is just this says so much about him," and it just all fell together. So I wrapped it up right before like midnight.
Well, thank you. Stunning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should finish this, Christine.
Yeah,
Thank you
okay.
again, and thank you
Thank you, everybody.
at NCR to give us that. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.